Let's talk about it.
No, sound like it.
Is it on? There's a switch. Yes. Let's try this one. Windows straight turned off. Yeah. It's on. Let's see. Takes a few seconds. Yeah. Oh.
Switch on the mic. Hardware switch.
That one's recording, yeah?
Yeah.
That one's recording, that one's recording. I think we're good.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Hope you had a good lunch. That was great. Okay. And I'll just get started now. Pretty sure. Fine. Hello. Okay. So my name is Andrew Lefebvre from Culvert Labs. The title of my presentation is Simplify Man, Harmonizing Layout Paragraphs and Single Directory Components to Alleviate Content Fatigue. It's a kind of long title, but I'm trying to describe layout paragraphs and single directory components kind of at the same time and putting them together. I've given a couple presentations before. This is my first intermediate one that I gave, and there's some technical stuff I'll show later, but yeah, wanted to look at how we can think of how a content author is looking at a page, especially if they're looking at something from a marketing perspective and they need the page to do a lot of different dynamic things. But the layout paragraphs have been around for a while, and there's a way that we can kind of harmonize these two kind of groups, make sure that everything is operating in its kind of sweet spot of where it needs to be, and then we can kind of avoid on some headaches that happen with certain projects at certain points. I have the presentation slides added to the description of this on the website. There's also a QR code if you want to follow along. If you want, it's fine. So I'm Andrew Lefebvre from Ottawa. Been a web developer, working with Drupal for 3.5 years or so. Today we're going to be talking about paragraphs and layout paragraphs, components, and SCCs. Does anyone not know what a paragraph is? Or not know what a layout paragraph is? Okay, and then you know what components are in SCCs? That's new. Okay, great. Okay, well, I'll try not to go super fast, but we're going to talk about layout builder too. But we will kind of go through this, and I have a bit of a roadmap to make sure I don't lose to that many people. So we're going to be talking about just a bit about layout builder, and then kind of going through defining what a paragraph is, then talking about layout paragraphs as a concept and how it's used in Drupal, and then just quickly components, single directory components, and then kind of everything thrown together all at once. Okay. So I grew up watching The Simpsons. There's this moment that happens in the early part, and I was kind of thinking of this frustration that people get sometimes. And Seymour is a principal here trying to raise money for a school, and he's just trying to raise money, and he gets 85 cents for this thing, and he's complaining his frustration. And then this guy is just like, you gotta simplify, man, and it sounds like you're working for your car. And to me, when I was coming up with this kind of idea that sometimes we make a Drupal website, and then content editors are like, it's not working, and then we're like, yeah, but it should, and to them, we sound like the person that's like, oh, it sounds like you're working for your Drupal site. So trying to take this from an approach of, hey, if there's a lot of things that a page needs to do, we can kind of organize information to be as flexible as possible. We're in a state where Drupal Canvas is coming. We have layout paragraphs. I gave a presentation 2 years ago about layout paragraphs. And I think the user count has gone up 2 or 3 times since then. So layout paragraphs are being more and more adopted there. So we'll get into that, but I have a couple of Simpsons pictures coming up. Also, I was surprised to see that the internet said that content fatigue meant something else, so I just want a quick disclaimer that when I'm talking about content fatigue in my title, the internet seems to think it means exhaustion and disengagement that occurs when people are overexposed to too much content on the internet. It's not really what I'm talking about. I'm just referring to this idea of the content management experience when it becomes overly time-consuming and draining and challenging, and then you have to update something and then you don't know where it is, or you're trying to update something and you hear complaints from content authors that are like, oh, I updated it, but it didn't work, and that page isn't there. So really, in a sense, we're looking at, there's times where a content on a page is stored in multiple locations, and we sometimes teach Drupal content authors to, oh, you can do this in Layout Builder, or you can do this in the content editing form. And layout paragraphs kind of solves this problem of kind of keeping everything in the same page and kind of keeping everything contained in the same edit form. So as long as that node edit form page has all your fields and all your content, layout paragraphs exists in one of those fields, and you have a nice little like drag and drop kind of region that we'll go into. And yeah, Drupal is a reliable CMS. We can kind of template the layouts to be very specific things. If we have events or news items that we can have our content types organized, we can have the layouts be all templated so that the content author just has to fill in the fields and that's it, and everything's great and fine. But there's times where a marketer or like there's this need for a landing page, or there's this need for, hey, like this page needs to serve many, many purposes, or it might look different in between the two, and we don't want to have individualized layouts and things. So we're really looking at this from layout paragraphs as, hey, there's a region that needs to do a lot of things at once, and we'll go into detail there. But that's kind of what we're looking at today. So just looking at Layout Builder. Layout Builder is a tool that we use to define displays that content types have. There's a lot of fields and different regions and sections and things that can be placed. Usually when you're using Layout Builder, you can place the fields that from the content type there. You can also place view blocks, and you can place custom blocks as well if they exist. You can place other sections from other components too. So we kind of use this as our main, like the content of the page is going to exist all in this area from like the region standpoint defined by the theme, and you kind of pick and choose where you want things to go from this section. And you can also, the default is that like all events, once you agree to like, hey, this is what an event looks like, that all events, every time you make a new event would look the same, but you can also change that to be like an individual basis, but it gets a little bit more complicated when you do that. So that's kind of just what Layout Builder is. When we're talking about other components too, like it's not just nodes that have a Layout Builder managed display form. A lot of other Drupalism kind of components also have that managed display. So we'll talk about that again later. I just wanted to start there. Okay, so now we're on to paragraphs. Paragraphs are entities that kind of exist. They don't really exist on their own. They're always attached to something. And they're a predefined like template or field or kind of group of information that's kind of stacked. Paragraphs are kind of an answer to like having a body field like for a Seek editor that just had a whole bunch of content, and you're kind of managing all the stuff that's going on inside there. And so paragraphs is a really good way to kind of block your site out into, well, these are different types of information, types of components and things. So you can have text, you can have images and text side by side that we define and we kind of talk about a paragraph as like a collection of different pieces of information. And then we can have a paragraph that's an image, or have a paragraph that's an accordion, or a heading, or a call to action, or you kind of build out your components from there that we'll talk about in a minute. The big thing to just remember about paragraphs is that they're not repeatable. They're kind of used for one-time use things. So if you want to be repeating information on multiple pages, you need to look at something that has access to the blocks and like field blocks and stuff like that. But paragraphs are really good for kind of keeping track of that kind of what would be in the body section, but it's just that body section content is just way overwhelming. It needs to do more. Just here's an example of a simple paragraph. Like I said, there's predefined fields and templates for that. So like this is just like a body field, but you can have any number of fields or any things that you want to define for that. So there we go. And then by default, when you're using paragraphs, you just define it as like a entity revision from your content type, and then you kind of get access to this like one column. All your paragraphs exist in a row. So depending on each page within a content type, like you can do this to any type of content type, depends on your structure, but sometimes you have like a news item, but like what's inside the news is a little bit different each time, so you can kind of block out that content. And by default, just with Drupal paragraphs, when you have the module installed, you get like the one column. So it's all kind of in a list. So now we're going to talk about layer paragraphs, which is like another layer of complexity on top of that. Okay, so layout paragraphs is a way to take a section of your page, and instead of it being a one column of paragraphs, you can predefine other kind of selection points that you want to exist in that area. So you can have like a two column layout section that exists in there, and then you have access to put paragraphs in either of those two sections, not just restricted to the one column. You can also have other types of predefined sections. Later, we're going to make our own sections with and have our own things exist in there, but just from like a concept of what layout paragraphs are, we get some by default with the system where it's mainly just, oh, we want different types of columns, and then we can have like on one page there's like a 3-column section, a 2-column section. Actually, I have a better picture coming up, but yeah, I can go from there. But yeah, so from layout paragraphs, the Drupal module kind of page has this nice picture that kind of really describes, and part of it is intended to kind of look a bit like Layout Builder because it's using the same Drupal layout API, and I think the Drupal Canvas stuff that's coming up is using the same layout stuff too in a certain way. But really you can define your sections, so like layout paragraphs would have like this as one section, this is another section, and then you have your different regions that are named, and then that's where your fields of the paragraphs that you're inserting in the page can exist. And so the user who's editing the page gets to pick where they go, where if you're just using Layout Builder, it's the developer that has to pick where they go, and then you can give that to the content editor, but sometimes they get really confused because they're managing 2 forms. So this stays in the same form, and we're needing to just understand that it's not just one list of paragraphs, there's other sections, these other layouts that are there. Okay, good. Anyone have any questions like so far? Great. I mean, I waited like no time, but that's fine. Okay. So to use layout paragraphs, there's just a form setting that we need to change so that when we're looking at the form on a node, that they're seeing this layout paragraphs widget. So there's just like a setting you need to turn from the form display. And there's also a control for allowing paragraphs to be placed however you want or whenever you want, or you can turn on this setting that can restrict them to only be within a section. And then this is just an empty one right now, but when you're on the form edit page, you kind of see like what is the section that you have, and then you can add sections above or below it, but also you can add your paragraphs directly in that kind of middle question mark there, and that's where they start going and need to exist. Okay, so those layout sections, we can kind of define them and have them be available to the site. We actually need to have them be created as their own paragraph types, and then we have a little, like, we change the behavior of it to have it be used as a section. So in this case right here, there's like a column paragraph, and in its settings we're saying that a column paragraph can be 1 column or 2 column or 3 column. We don't need to make individual paragraphs for each of those types, we can just have them be available. And then when they're being placed to the page, there's like a modal that comes up, and you just ask the user what you want to have access to. So yeah, we can kind of give selections, and we don't have to predefine every single step is what's important here. And we can also make our own and have our own custom layouts, and then they also exist inside the as a selection option too when we define them ourselves. So in this slide, this is a list of paragraphs that I have on my demo that's coming up, and I just put arrows on the paragraphs that exist that aren't like paragraphs of content, they're layout sections. So they're being used, these are different layout sections that can be applied within layout paragraphs. They can have fields too. You can put like, oh, like this column has like a heading field. You're not restricted to, like, you don't have to like just use them as sections and that's it. You can treat them as paragraphs, but layout paragraphs and these layout sections are trying to avoid this common problem that happens with paragraphs where you're not supposed to really nest them, or things get really complicated when you have a paragraph that references other paragraphs, but there's times where you want sections of like cards or content to kind of exist and populate in the same area. And sometimes it can look right on the front end when you have paragraphs within paragraphs, but it gets really awkward and cumbersome to migrate them or to fix them if you have to do database fixes and things. So instead, the kind of direction in using layout paragraphs is you define your sections, you use your sections, and then you kind of go from there. So in our examples coming up, we have an accordion section, columns, container, and tabs, and then the other paragraphs exist that are defined too. Okay, so that setting about, oh, can you allow paragraphs without a section or not? I just wanted to just take a clear distinction just to make sure that that's not super confusing, because at a certain point, we have like all these like boxes, and Drupal like loves to do this with forms and with displays and with regions and things, and when you're templating sites, you can get used to it, and then you can get like, okay, I understand, but sometimes there's a lot of different like block levels and region levels, but it's all like templated out so that the person who's editing the one component, the one piece, doesn't need to worry about what's outside of it. So just for the context of what layout paragraphs is doing, we have our node page where the layout builder is going to define most of the stuff. I have a field content where all my paragraphs are going to be, but it's in the form display setting called layout paragraphs, so it's going to show the layout paragraph UI. And I've added a column layout section first, which is in this case a column layout section paragraph that's 3 columns, and then I can add my 3 content paragraphs, and it will show me them side by side. So this setting is basically saying if we're enforcing that paragraphs themselves have to be within a section, then they can't be placed outside of it, like above or below, depending on how complex you are. Sometimes you don't want that to happen, or you don't want headings to be there, but generally this is on, and if we're defining sections on purpose, we want content to be predictable, so we predefine sections. The only layer of complexity is that you need to add a section first, and some content editors just see an empty box and they're like, I can't add it. Like, why can't I add my heading? I want to add my heading. And then it's just no, you need to add the section first. So sometimes we just turn that off and just let them place what they want. Okay, so just a quick just picture of what an editing form can look like. So in the editing form, when layout builder is working, or layout paragraphs is working, sorry, within the editing form, you kind of have this section here. So everything that's in this area is the columns section, and I have a 2-column section there, and then I have a 3-column section over here, and then other sections there. So by default, layout paragraphs kind of gives you this like template, like kind of vision, like, okay, this is where the things are going to be. There's going to be other things on the page too, like other like blocks and other things, but this is just within the content, just within like the meat of like what defines this page for being what it is. That's where we want to use layout paragraphs. That's where we want like that main body to be of whatever it is. So that's kind of how you can visualize it, and then you can like add content above and below and stuff that I'll go into in the demo. Okay, so now we need to pivot a little bit. It's good on time. And just talk about components quickly, and just defining like what a component is. So when we refer to components, we're talking about a collection of YAML component and like code and like templating image, like the twig templates and stuff, and it's just markup that's being contained and self-contained, so we can predefine like what a card looks like, or we can define what a certain structure that will look like in a small setting. And we like to use components because they're isolated, they're easy to maintain and define. If we change something about one of these components, it'll apply everywhere it's used, unless there's an override. They're consistent when implementing them, and they're pretty easy to use. It's easy to add different like controls and properties to them, to add like variants of different colors or different settings. If you have a card, and then you know that you're going to want a card that sometimes doesn't have a border on the outside, that you can use components in many different ways to kind of get these different effects. And it's really good to like define your theming structure, to have these kind of defined, these are the things that will exist on the site, and then define them as a component. So we kind of need to understand that this component kind of structure is a thing that has been gaining a lot of momentum, and Drupal's been kind of looking for a way to like really like use this in a consistent way. There's been a lot of different, just in my like recent experience with Drupal, I have a lot of experience with making UI patterns, which was like another way of including components. There's also like Storybook and Figma and things, but today we're going to be talking about single directory components as like a concept of a thing, which is kind of using what a component is and then including it into the site. So now, we're now here. Okay, I think we're actually a little bit fast, so I can probably slow down a little bit. Okay, so single directory components is just referring to combining and collecting like all of the information that's about a component, if you can, about like what a heading is, or what a card is, or an accordion, and all of the YAML that defines what the structure is, all the twig that gets rendered to the page is also kept there, and then any optional styling or JavaScript is also kind of included there. There's a concept called props that's important that I'll describe later, but it's mainly just referring to like the mapping the attributes and it's kind of defining what type of structure it is and things, and it's really good to use props if you have certain effects or things that you want to have happen. When using this component, or you have certain settings that aren't going to change, and you're using this one component in a very specific way. But then there's something called slots, which is used for more flexible content, where you have like a region of this component that you're not quite sure what's going to be in there, but it's ready to kind of accept that markup and whatever that is, and ready to go from there. So we kind of need to balance this use of props and slots. Components in this kind of context is been part of Drupal core since Drupal 10.1, I think. And so if you have your single directory components defined, and they're defined in a theme or in a custom module or something, that Drupal knows how to like scan them and find them and include them to where they're defined and stuff. So as long as we have a single directory component that is defined and accepted and it's valid, then whenever we're using Layout Builder, we can actually add that single directory component as its own section, just like a 2-column layout or whatever. So this is like a way of like giving extra structure to things. So I got my mouse here. Yeah, I have like a pointer. I think might be helpful. A little bit. Okay. So the single directory part of this single directory components is just ensuring that the structure of what's going on for that one component is in its own subdirectory. So if I have a folder called components, and then I have a folder called heading, and then I have the heading component YAML, which is what's on the left here, and then a twig file, which I guess is optional, but you probably want to use a twig file. That this is all Drupal needs to be able to read this as, oh, okay, there's something called a heading. I'm going to like use this as an available component. And so all of our components that are part of the site, we can kind of include them one at a time. Before, if we were using like UI patterns, we might want to put the actual like definitions and the twig templates in one folder, but then keep the styling and theming like kind of separate into the theme module. Excuse me. But for single directory components, you do have the ability of including everything together, and so Drupal will kind of be able to handle all that work of, oh, this is where the styling is. For my demo today, I don't have JavaScript or CSS really handling it here, but it is definitely available and ready to go. And just for like the structure of what the boilerplate is for a component is that you need to have the name that matches. You need to have your, like if you're using slots and props, to have them defined separately. And then we're also using variants later on. But that's pretty much all you need to really to use to get going. Is that it's looking for a certain amount of markup and the YAML settings, and then you're fine. The slots, if you're familiar with UI patterns, UI patterns kind of has a kind of thing called fields, which are different than Drupal fields, but slots operate a lot similarly to how UI pattern fields work. So if you have that experience there, you can kind of understand it a little bit better. And then here's an example of our heading, but from the twig side. So that's what this file looks like. And it's just regular twig template stuff. We can put our logic in for how we want our heading to behave. And then this kind of area here is where the text of the heading would end and go. And that's what our slot is. So we have a slot called text, and then the slot is actually visible in certain areas based on the twig logic. But yeah, once a heading is used by the Drupal site, it's going to look for this component file and then use this component file, and then any content author that's ever needed to use a heading, they don't need to like define any HTML, they don't need to know HTML code, they just need to know that headings will look like this because that's what it's supposed to be. That's why we like to use them and define them this way. So a kind of common problem that SUCs have kind of had floating around there is that we can make them and define them and make them available, but we're looking for, or we kind of sometimes have different opinions or trying to figure out different ways of being able to place single directory components, because they're open and available to Layout Builder, but not necessarily like always present or like readily like understood of how to include them. And so we know that we can have them be available as sections, and so we can place them into Layout Builder, but we can also play them into layout sections, basically anywhere there's like the layout API. So we'll look at using them both, or like using SDCs as components. So here is an example that we'll use on the demo for the single directory component, the heading that we just saw being used in Layout Builder. So this is the Layout Builder page for our heading paragraph. So our site will have a paragraph type that's just called heading. When we're using a heading, it's going to use this Layout Builder, and this section I have highlighted here is the heading single directory component. And we have our settings that we can use. If I had a variant defined for this heading, I could select it there. I can add, I have logic actually for the level I can show later, but when you're using a heading, you're not forced to use an H2 or use an H3, that whoever's using it can define what it is. So we have that setting defined in the prop, and then it's going to show up here for us to map the level that's for the twig is actually going to be the level that's on the paragraph, so that paragraph select level will be taken from the content author, given to the twig, given to the component, and then rendered to the page. So this is Layout Builder using the single directory component, okay? So now we are going to take what we've learned so far and what we've discussed and put them all together and try not to confuse everyone, because we're going to be talking about paragraphs. Yes?
That's a good question.
Yeah, this is good.
That property editor that you have.
Yeah, this one?
Is that the source for your props?
This is my
Is the source for your props in there as well?
This is in Layout Builder. This is what I have access to from single directory components as like the configuring for that section within Layout Builder.
Okay, so the props there passes through those values to the props object.
Yes.
in your property.
Yeah. The attributes are like mandatory, and then any other like settings I had for other controls for things, I can have it. Just like I have the variant that was being selected here. So yeah, all of those kind of options and things that you can include, they'll all be available there, because there's times where like you're using tokens or you're trying to use like a setting of something, and depending on the context of where you're placing it, the developer knows, oh, I need this to use this token for something. But we still want to use Layout Builder for defining the paragraph use, even though we're using them somewhere else, like on the node page. So, and just kind of taking what the structures are best at, using Layout Builder for what it is, but then still making this available out like everywhere. Okay, so layout sections and single directory components. So in this picture here, I have my predefined heading paragraph that's placed in layout paragraphs, right? Yes, and it is the single directory component of like the heading single directory component. So when I have a heading paragraph defined, I know, hey, I just need to put in my text. When it gets rendered to the page as an H2, it'll just look like that on the page. So when I have layouts paragraphs and I'm putting in my paragraphs, I can just have them be defined. That paragraph type will always look like this, based on how I have it set. So whenever we're seeing heading in layout paragraphs, it's really rendering what the single directory component was from Layout Builder. Okay. Now, you may have seen that I was using variants in our components, in our definitions for there. And so the heading that we have defined is not just being used as the heading paragraph. We're also using headings in accordion, like the header part of an accordion, and also the like heading part of a title, of a tab as well. So we have the single directory component of a heading, but because we can use the variants, what I've done is I've taken the manage display kind of display view mode. So when a paragraph is being used by default, it's using the default logic. But when it's in the accordion title or the tab title, all I've done is change the, should have had this here, the variant that's being selected. I've selected the accordion title or the tab title. So the layout builder itself is actually mapping to those other ones, which is important because of what's coming. But we don't have to like duplicate our logic. We can have one heading. It can be used in many places, but when it's being used in the heading paragraph as its main form, it will look like that. That's what's important here. Just we have other types of headings rooted in the same component. So what I've done is that I have two other sections that are defined on the site. So a layout section, like our columns, we're not restricted or like, we're not forced to just use those ones. So I have an accordion section that's on the left there, and I have a tab layout section that would look like this on the right. So when I'm placing layout paragraphs, I can place an accordion or I can place a tab. And then when I place a heading, which is the paragraph, inside that section, it'll actually change and look like the accordion variant. And if I have a heading in the tab section, it will actually change and look like the tab one based on its variant. So there's like a little bit of code to make that happen, but it's not super complicated, and it's mainly just, hey, if we're using accordions or using tabs, the content editor doesn't have to know, like, oh frig, this heading, this field has to be, like, this heading field has to be filled in for this accordion. They can just use and place their heading paragraphs, and then those paragraphs will just adapt based on how they're rendered, because they're part of the sections and because they're part of the SCC components. So I'll show some examples of this for sure, but just we're getting into the part of another layer of complexity. So we had layout paragraphs, we're making our own sections, which I think I described in the next slide. Then we have a tab item component, which I haven't quite described yet, and then we have our other regular paragraphs that are placed in there. Okay. Okay. So here's just a quick example of making your own section. So making your own layout section, we put all of our components and sections in this module called like the name component library. So for here we just have an accordion section, and it has just a content area, and we have an accordion paragraph that just has the layout paragraphs behavior selected, and our own custom container class section comes up there. So what we defined as our own layout section, which doesn't have a whole lot, it's just called a section and called it an accordion, and then we can assign that paragraph of, hey, whenever an accordion paragraph is being used, we're using the accordion section, and then we're going to put stuff in it. Okay. And then the same thing for tabs. Tabs are pretty close to the same. So we're going to use these components because our client wants to use accordions or want to use tabs, but we don't want to really redefine all the headings of everything. And we want to be able to put everything to be placed together. Okay, so you may have noticed that I had accordion item as a component and a tab item component. That these are STC components too, but they're not paragraphs. That we don't need to define like what the inner part of an accordion is. You can use like two paragraphs to like build like an accordion container, and then have your accordion item paragraphs, and then you can kind of like nest them that way. But by using single directory components, we're not really restricted by that. We can define our components and still use them in the sections. And so what we'll go into next is the defining like what an accordion item STC component is, what a tab item STC component is, that these are components that are inside a section that are using the paragraphs. Okay, so here is so just like the heading component that we had as a single directory component, this is what the tab item single directory component is. So I just have the same rules where I have a tab item, I have a slot that's just the body, so whatever's inside the tab, or like what the tab is, and then I just have my attributes prop that I need, and so all it's doing is just saying, hey, I'm a tab item, I belong in, I'm going to add this to a tab. So the tab is the section that contains a tab item, and then all my paragraphs are going to get shoved into that body twig field, and then let the paragraphs themselves like do their thing, of whatever they are. But the structure and rules that I apply to defining what my accordion is and defining what my tab are, that they're not necessarily controlled by the tab item. The tab item just needs to be there as a component. So we're mixing what a tab item is. And then here's the accordion. We're only using the accordion body slot, or we're not using the footer. But when we're using a heading for an accordion, the header paragraph is going to be going into the header slot, and then the body of the accordion items are going to be going into this body slot here. So we're kind of mapping them all. Okay, so that's what you're going to be seeing. It's now time for the demo where I'll show it working, and then we can kind of go through and explain if we need to. But yeah, I think we're good for time. But it's just this understanding of when to use. I can switch out here. When to use. We're just trying to use layout of paragraphs and then define. And we're trying to use this way of simplifying the layout paragraphs to be able to use our headings, use our components. It'll still look the same on the page. We're just defining things and then nesting them inside each other. So I have a simple site here that's just using layout paragraphs. So the one that we were mainly using was this guy. So this content field here, everything that's inside here is layout paragraphs. Every time you kind of hover, you'll see like this text block here is not part of any section right now. So this content type allows for the extra ones to, like the paragraphs just to be on their own. But I have a column section here that I can drag around and move all these up if I need to. I have a 3-column section here for layout paragraphs. And then my tabs section is now here being defined. So everything that's inside here is a tab, and then everything inside here is an accordion. And so what the render template is going to be doing is it's going to be taking the headings and then making those a tab. So the tab 1 will be the heading of tab 1, and then this will be the text inside that tab, and then the heading will be the next tab here. So the content author can just kind of define them for what they want this order to be, and then when it's displayed, the logic that makes the accordion work will just work, which I can show that too if we need to. But if you're a content author who doesn't care about how accordions work, you can just put your content into the layout paragraphs, and then you have your tabs working, and then your accordions can be here, and then your content that's inside the accordions will just be there. And so we have a heading that is being used in one way, in another way, and in like a third way. But we've defined them once. It's only one type of paragraph, but it's being used in 3 ways because the single directory component can kind of being used in all 3 ways, and then it just takes like a little bit of code just to have the headings go into the right spot. Here we want the heading to actually go in the top of the accordion, and then here we want the heading to go into the top of the tab. So that's basically what we're doing. If I want to change the order of these, say I need to update them quickly, you can just update them normally, like this was a regular edit form. But what's really powerful about this is that say you have content that needs to go to the other form and you want to like move these around, or if like the headings themselves need to switch places, you don't have to, you're not restricted in having the heading being part of a field of a section or being part of a field of a paragraph. You can just have them be headings and then have them be placed, and then they're there, and then it's not having to like, oh, I need to take this one field, copy it over, move it over. I can just save the page, move them, and then those new tabs will be there. So we're looking at kind of addressing an issue where you have a site that has a lot of content, there's a lot of like, there's a lot of content that's being fit in, and they're needing to make changes, but they don't, the time it's taken to edit these complex individual pages is really daunting, and they're like, oh man, we have to do all this work, that if we have access to drag and drop, we're looking for ways to be able to help with this. I can say like what section it is, so this is the setting that's being passed through the prop of a heading. So that's being added to there. So if I need to change these heading levels or whatever, you can kind of do that. And then the actual text themselves, they're still being controlled. So we're taking like what was in a full body field, we're breaking it down and kind of moving it into these spots. And the last thing I just want to show before I open to questions is just how we're getting the those components to work for those who are interested about how these are working. So in line code for a component, so like we said for, like we'll just look at a tab. So the tab itself is just defined normally, and then my tab section, so this is the code, this code here for the twig, and come on, make that a little bit bigger, I'm sorry. There's just a YAML for defining what you want your accordion tabs to be. And then in my theme, I have an override for the layouts tab. And when it's being used, which is whenever it's being used as a layout, as a paragraph section in this case, we're just taking what was already defined as the tab item component, and we're just including that into this template. I just want, there. My mouse is like falling down, so, okay. So, all we're really doing is taking the layout of a tab, including the single directory component of the tab item, and then there's a little bit of custom logic that's taking if it finds a heading paragraph, it's going to throw the heading paragraph up into the heading section, and that's how you get your headings kind of as the like clickable areas for stuff for the accordions to work, and then all of the for the tabs to work, and then the accordions and the tabs are close to the same anyway. That the accordion one is just pretty much the same, where you have your accordions and then putting in there. So it's great because we can make sure that the tabs and accordions themselves, that the structure that it is doesn't get changed by the content editors. They don't need to concern themselves about it. We can make sure when we're defining components that they're accessible and that they're going to work. And so if I'm here, because this is built with accessibility in mind, if I'm trying to tab into that all my like tab controls will work fine. But yeah. But that kind of access and control, it's just not doing what I want there. But yeah, you get access to having components that are accessible, that work, they're defined, they're easy to use. There's no like, oh man, I need to go into layout builder and use all these sections. You just have the layout kind of definitions happen, and there we go. Okay, I think I went a bit too long, but if anyone has any questions, happy to talk more about it afterwards too, but that's kind of what I've got going on. Did I have any other slides? I don't think so. I think I just had a question slide. It's important to stay up to task. Oh, and I can also just summarize things. So yeah, so we talked about layout paragraphs, single directory components, and how those are both made. Just a way to kind of use them all together by understanding, hey, like we have this ability for developers to know like where these places go, but the way that a content author or a way that someone who's maintaining the site is entering Drupal doesn't really care about how all these other systems work. They understand that content is in the content form. How can we put more control to them in that content editing form? And then they have that flexibility to just make their marketing rules and their strategies for things, and being able to reduce that editing time when they need to. And then for next steps, we're looking to adding some more like visual distinctions within the editing form. That there are some ways, but we're looking into including more of that, just so that if you have a column with a different background, that background will be visible there. And then you have there's other improvements with layout paragraphs and Canvas coming that we're looking to include. So yeah, any questions? Yes?
I came in a little bit late, so sorry if we've already considered this, but is your premise layout paragraphs is the thing to use for now? Drupal Canvas is going to be cool,
Yes.
but not quite yet.
I'm really excited for Drupal Canvas and how it's going to help the like new creation of new components and things for the site, and for like a content author to just, hey, I have all my stuff, I just want to throw things in and then go. So I'm really excited for what Drupal Canvas can offer for that type of distinction. But I think they're like, it's either, I'm not sure yet if it's like replacing the editing form, or like, you know, like some other solutions are using layout paragraphs with like a different editing form. And so mainly just promoting, layout paragraphs have been around for quite a while. We can use them keeping people into editing content from the editing form, and then using single directory components in more kind of like in other ways and whatever, to try and get that kind of headache pain stuff of like, oh man, I just want the stuff to work and head it quicker. That if part of the restriction is that they don't want to go to where the blocks are defined or where other things are defined, that they can kind of stay where layout paragraphs are, and they don't have to worry about custom blocks or custom override layout builder stuff. Is kind of what I'm going for. Okay, any other questions? Does it work?
I can ask one.
Yes.
But it's a very beginner question.
That's fine, Paul.
So, way back when, we had content types,
Mhm.
and that also seemed to group together at least fields
Definitely.
and kinds of data. And I've never been able to figure out how that relates to, like, single directory components, or like, even the stuff in Layout Builder.
Right, yeah, and it's hard because fields can exist in nodes as like a content type, or they can exist in blocks, or they can exist in paragraphs, and so fields are just like the inputs and things that we put text in, and a whole bunch of other details and references and things, and then how they're used. The way that a field is the same, but how we use these other tools is what gets challenging and complex, because you have like, oh, fields in terms of a content type, oh, they'll be on the page. But what we're really just needing to, the only kind of like, the biggest common ground that they have is that all these defined structures that are defined as types, they all have a like managed display page. And so whenever Drupal is rendering anything, it's going to be looking for what is defined in this managed display section. And so all of those fields, they will exist, they will be part of the data structure, but they're not going to be outputted to the page unless you tell them to. And so for our heading, let's show what the accordion title looks like as the variant. So when we're looking at the title field of a heading paragraph, that title field just exists in the section there, and it's in the field itself that will be the text of whatever the heading is in that section that's being defined, and then we're setting the accordion item variant to it. So it's just if you have the concept of a field, it's just knowing that Drupal can like really do a lot with different fields based on where it is and what's being structured, and just kind of handling the use case for each of them. And there's times where paragraphs will be used a bit too much, or used in other ways, or paragraphs will be added to blocks, and it's like, oh good, we can use blocks that have paragraph fields on them, and then we're getting into extra layers of complexity. So it's just the fields do their thing, and then the other structures kind of have a place for different types of solutions. And so when we're trying to follow best practices, we're trying to keep progression moving along where we have all this stuff kind of filled out there. Okay, I think we're out of time, but it was very nice having everyone here. Thank you so much for sticking around.